Hello and welcome everyone to our webinar series, Ask the Experts. Today we have a special guest speaker, Kris Elliott, who joins us from New Zealand. Kris is the Australia-New Zealand Sales Manager for StoreCove. Hello and welcome, Kris. Thank you for being here today.
It's my pleasure. Thank you for inviting me.
Today we are This is where the slide changes. Today we are talking about the Peppol E-Invoicing, which is an exciting new invoicing technology that is rapidly gaining momentum, both in Australia, New Zealand, and around the world. I'm going to pass over to you, Kris, so that you can tell us a bit more about how the Peppol and invoicing and your company StoreCove fit into this.
Sure. So Peppol began in Europe about a decade or so ago as a project to try and standardise procurement documents and to facilitate the exchange of those documents within the EU, particularly around public procurement and government supply chains. However, since then, it's grown to include not just B2G procurement, but also B2B, with companies e-invoicing each other as well as their government customers. It's now spread beyond Europe into Singapore, Australia, New Zealand, and there are many other countries now at various points of adopting e-invoicing and in the process of considering Peppol as a means to achieve that. Peppol itself basically has three parts to it. Part number one is the kind of governance, which is Open Peppol itself. They are the non-profit made up of membership from public and private organisations all over the world. And they govern the standards and the network across multiple countries by appointing regional authorities within each jurisdiction. In Australia, the Peppol Authority is the Australian Tax Office, the ATO, and in New Zealand it's the Ministry of Business, Innovation and Employment, or MB. These authorities in turn then run an accreditation process to validate and certify which vendors in the market can provide access point services to the Peppol network within that jurisdiction. So that's kind of part number one, it's all wrapped up in governance. Part number two are the Peppol document types themselves, and these are the specifications or the requirements and standards for the various e-procurement document types, of which e-invoicing is one, and it's the one that we're focusing on today. This includes the structure and the rules around how e-invoices are formatted and what information they must contain. The third part of Peppol is the network, and this is the medium through which those documents are exchanged between trading partners. Now, usage of the Peppol network can only be accomplished using an access point to the network, which, as I just mentioned, have to be accredited by an authority for that region. So say, for example, a European access point can't provide those services here unless they also have accreditation from ATO to do so. So to use an imperfect analogy that's perhaps becoming a little overused, the Peppol network is kind of like using a cell phone. You and the person you're calling can have different handsets, but each of you still need to use the services of a telco before you can call each other. So it's kind of similar to e-invoicing in that you and your trading partner can have different finance systems, but you need to each use an access point service in order to be able to transact over the network. Now that's where StoreCove comes into it, the company that I work for. We are an access point provider that helps software vendors, companies, government agencies, solution providers become Peppol enabled so that they can send and receive e-invoices across the Peppol network. We're headquartered in the Netherlands and have been doing this for pretty much as long as Peppol has been around, which is the better part of a decade or so. We've received accreditation from the ATO as well as MB in New Zealand, and we were actually the first in the world to be accredited across every Peppol region. So our experience and solution maturity means that we're arguably one of the fastest, cheapest and easiest ways for someone to become Peppol ready.
Okay, wonderful. Yes, so I've asked you here today to help shed some light on Peppol e-invoicing. And you said that e-invoicing is both the e-invoice as a document and also about a network for how those documents are sent and received. Just touching on the first part, for those who aren't familiar, can you quickly explain the difference between a digital invoice and an electronic invoice, e-invoice, and why would companies choose to e-invoice?
Okay, sure. Well, we all know what an invoice is, right? It's a commercial document issued by a seller to a buyer that contains details of a commercial transaction. You know, products and services, prices, dates, that kind of thing. And I think if we asked everyone to picture what an invoice looks like, most people would probably imagine something resembling an A4 document. This is probably because for a large part of history, the invoice was actually a physical record, right? It wasn't until email really took off as a serious business tool that people started emailing invoices, mainly because it was faster and cheaper than printing and posting them. Now, these emailed invoices are what we would typically call digital invoices. They're created and distributed as files, with some never actually even becoming a physical printed document. So this in turn has led to the rise of accounts payable and capture platforms that use things like OCR and machine learning and RPA to kind of emulate that human experience of reading a document to speed up how they can be processed. Now, both invoices and digital invoices are what we call semi-structured documents. And what I mean by that is they have structure in the sense that there are certain compulsory elements that they have to contain in order to be valid, like, you know, a date or an invoice number, a tax number, a total, etc. But they lack structure in the sense that there's no consistency around how that information is presented. Put more simply, digital invoices are still kind of created with that piece of paper in mind. So the design and layout of invoice information included on the pages is completely arbitrary between systems and or companies. And that's where e-invoices come in. Strictly speaking, an e-invoice is an exchange of data more than it is a document in the A4 paper sense of the word document. It's structured into fields and designed to be exported by one system and imported by another. It isn't flattened onto a page and then reinterpreted by either a person or some technology emulating how that person would read it. They aren't designed to be human friendly with logos and nice layouts and stuff like that. In many ways, it's much like what some people may know as EDI, which strictly speaking it kind of is, although there are some differences which, for the sake of time, I won't go into right now. But I guess bringing this kind of long-winded answer back to your original question of what's the difference between a digital invoice and an e-invoice, the short answer is that a digital invoice is created to be interpreted by people, whereas e-invoices are created to be ingested by systems. Sure, there are ways to emulate the capture of digital invoices, but one could argue that those solutions are just trying to convert a digital invoice into the format that an e-invoice would already be in, just so that the data can be ingested into the finance or the AP system. And that's kind of one of the main reasons why companies would choose to transact with e-invoices. The consistency and the accuracy of preserving that invoice information as data leads to speed of processing and payment. It enables workflow automation, it improves visibility, and et cetera, et cetera.
Okay, that's great information, Kris. Now I've also prepared a few questions for you. And also we had a register, so we had pre-submitted questions for this webinar. This is one of the questions that was submitted. Okay. Is Peppol e-invoicing an accounts payable or accounts receivable solution?
No. While Peppol e-invoicing can help enable the AP or an AR solution, Peppol itself is about the format and delivery of the e-invoices. It's not so much about the specific business rules that govern how an organization processes them after they receive them. So if we look at the relationship between, say, StoreCove and ACMO, that might make this a little clearer. ACMO's AP solution is an accounts payable solution, right? Once it receives invoices, it can help an organization apply business rules to determine how the invoice should be processed and the various steps it has to go through in order to be paid. Now, this could include anything from like GL coding to purchase order matching or routing for approval, validation, goods receipt, and stuff like that. What StoreCove brings to the table is the Peppol access point service so that the e-invoices can be fed directly into that solution. So while emailed and digital invoices get run through, an OCR process to extract information from a page, which is then fed into something like AP, e-invoices already exist as data and don't need to go through that process. So e-invoicing is more accurate because the e-invoice is literally what came out of the sender system and not a software application's attempt to read something on a page. Once the e-invoices are inside the AP solution, both digital and e-invoices should be processed the same way with the same business rules, irrespective of their format or how they were received in the first place. So I guess in short, and still in the context of accounts payable, I haven't even mentioned accounts receivable, Peppol e-invoicing is about a new ingestion channel for invoices. It's not about introducing a new separate business rule for how you need to process them.
Okay. Well, that's very interesting, and that also leads me to the next question. Okay. What do businesses need to do to start e-invoicing?
Okay, if you want a vendor-neutral starting point, then the ATO website's a good place to get some high-level info into what Peppol's all about, why Australia adopted it in the first place, that kind of stuff. It's also a good place to get updates on things like how the adoption's going and updates on the mandates and things like that. Once you're comfortable with the technology and the benefits that can be achieved through e-invoicing, you then need to have a talk to your existing solution providers and find out what their plans are in this area. If you have AP, then talk to ACMO. If you have, MYOBXO, then talk to your MYOB partner. If you have Tech1 or Oracle or Sage or any one of the dozens of other solution partners, then talk to the people you're already working with. If they have a plan around Peppol, that's great. If that plan works for you and it matches your time frames, that's even better. However, if they don't have a plan, or if their plan doesn't work for you, or even worse, they don't even know what the heck you're talking about, then you need to find somebody who knows a bit more about this stuff. Stalkover, happy to talk with anyone, irrespective of whether they're a company, a government agency, software developer, solution vendor, or heck, even our competitors. We talk to them sometimes too. We're happy to give help and advice to anyone that wants it. I think, though, that one of the biggest challenges at the moment is that many people have this kind of mistaken impression that implementing e-invoicing has to be this large-scale IT project that's going to take months and months to complete, and that, of course, it must have a huge price tag to match. But that simply isn't true. For some companies, it might simply be an education process to learn more about what they could already be doing. So, for example, Xero users can already send e-invoices now, but they just might not realize it and might just need a little bit of education to learn how to do it. For other companies, again, depending on factors like your systems and your volumes, it could be more comparable to something like setting up bank feeds into your ERP. If we look at something like Microsoft Dynamics Business Central as an example, it can already create and ingest the European formats for the Peppol e-invoice, and it just needs a mature access point service like store codes to adjust it to the AUNZ specifications and put the transaction through the network. Certainly, there are many organizations where this could potentially be a significant project, and those organizations tend to be larger ones that are using multiple systems, or maybe they might have dated ERPs. I guess one of the other things to bear in mind is whether what you're doing is only about enabling e-invoicing, or whether e-invoicing is a factor in a larger project. So, for example, if your business has traditionally relied on manual accounts payable processes and are considering implementing an AP solution like AP, then Peppol is only a small piece of that project, and I would argue that you should consider e-invoicing more as a feature of a solution as opposed to as being a self-contained solution in and of itself. So yeah, it's getting started might be a little bit different for everybody, but I think the first and foremost is to learn a bit more, speak to your partners, and then just be clear about what it is you're trying to achieve.
That's really good advice, Kris. Now, we've got some live questions, but before I get to those, I just had another question for you. So what are your top tips for making the case to management to get your business to be e-invoice ready? What are they going to miss out on if they don't?
Okay, I think it's kind of a continuation on from what I was just saying, that when preparing a business case, I think the first thing would be to understand why you're doing it. For some organisations, particularly government organisations, it might be about compliance. I mean, there are mandates out there now that state which government agencies must implement the ability to receive e-invoices and how long they have to do it. For other companies, though, it might be more about the benefits that can be achieved with e-invoicing, that e-invoicing can then help them realise. So, for example, businesses that are, say, currently supplying any form of government agency have immediate benefits in the form of faster payments. The proposed 5-day payment guarantee is a major attraction for small businesses. And it may, for other businesses, it may be about having the conversation about e-invoicing and what advantages it can offer in the future around speed and security. I think another thing to keep in mind is that you have to have a good understanding of your current invoice-related systems and processes. While e-invoicing can help AP or AR automation, it's important to acknowledge that implementing the stuff should be done with specific outcomes in mind. The key to building your business case is not necessarily in starting with the technology or the product and then trying to justify how it fits. The key is having a deep understanding of your current systems and processes. Not just as a sequence of steps, but a deeper recognition of why those steps need to occur and what they're designed to accomplish. I mean, in past forums, I've said things like that automating a bad process isn't going to fix it, it's just going to speed it up. And to an extent, that's also true with e-invoicing. New technology like e-invoicing may be a catalyst for change, but this kind of change should always be based on business benefits and not just on product features. Once you get to that level of understanding about your business in particular, it should then start becoming clearer whether e-invoicing is the project you want to undertake, or whether e-invoicing is more a piece of a wider automation project. So as I said before, it's the difference between being a feature of a project and being a project in of itself. I mean, there are many benefits Peppol e-invoicing can help you realise. The consistency of the e-invoice means they're less likely to fail validations. The accuracy means there are generally less errors in the data itself. Taken together, these enable faster processing, not just for you as a receiver, but potentially also for your trading partners when you are the sender. I mean, if you can help your trading partners process your invoice faster so that you can get paid faster, why would you not want to do that? Speed, consistency, accuracy start leading to things like better visibility of pending transactions, not to mention that e-invoicing is more secure as well. Ultimately, I think getting started on your e-invoicing journey is about applying these benefits to your specific business requirements. If businesses are only at the beginning of their journey and need to find some help doing this, then I'd advise them to talk to you and the team at ACMO first and foremost. I mean, I know you guys can consult on different invoice automation solutions as well as the Peppol e-invoicing piece. So you guys are really ideally positioned to be that trusted advisor that people are looking for.
Thank you. Yes, we would love to help out anyone who's interested. I've got a few live questions that have come in, Kris.
Okay.
Just checking. I'm just reading through a few at the moment. So the question is, you mentioned the Peppol Network is secure. Can you talk a bit more about that?
Okay, sure. For an organisation to transact on the Peppol Network, it needs to have a Peppol identifier. This identifier is globally unique, and it's how your trading partners know that they're transacting with the real you. In Australia, the Peppol ID is made up of the ABN. In New Zealand, if we've got any Kiwis on there, we use the NZBN. Now, because you have to use an accredited access point to get information into or out of the Peppol network, the access point providers like Sorcove are essentially the bouncers or the gatekeepers for the network. And we've got some responsibilities such as know your customer obligations to validate that the organisations we're connecting are who they say they are. So if you get an e-invoice from someone like BOC Gas, that you know it's been legitimately sent by BOC Gas. So this type of authentication and security means that third-party impersonation fraud is pretty much eliminated. There's no emails to intercept or change or anything like that. Sure, e-invoicing isn't going to prevent your supplier from charging you the wrong price or something, but at least you know that the invoice is actually from said supplier and it's not, you know, some invoicing scam out of somebody's garage in downtown Kiev.
Yeah. Yes. Fraud in AP is quite frightening, how much it costs Australian businesses.
Mm.
I've got another question that's come up. It reads, we have different software for sending invoices than we do for receiving them. Does each system need its own access point, or can we use one for both?
I think somebody's been reading it up on Peppol already. The short answer is that either scenario can work. You can use one access point to send and another to receive. So for example, if you were, again, say a Xero customer and also an ACMO AP customer, you might want to use Xero's own access point to send e-invoices directly from Xero. However, when you receive them, you'll want to use the AP access point, which is provided by Sorcode, of course, so that the invoices are delivered into AP rather than going straight into Xero. Alternatively, you could use the same service for both sending and receiving. Much really depends on the systems you use and whether the access point service is being provided by the vendors you get those systems from. One thing you do need to be mindful of, though, is that you can only receive from one access point. For sending, you can use as many different ones as you need to, but you can only receive through one. So think of it kind of like mail or the postal service. If you want to send somebody a letter, you can post it in any post box you like and it will get to where it's going, but you only have one mailbox at the end of your driveway. The key is to identify where you need the incoming invoices to be delivered and which system you need them to be in first. So in the Xero AP example I used before, you want the e-invoices in the AP solution so you can apply your business rules to the way they're coded and approved and matched, etc. You don't want the e-invoices to bypass AP and go directly into Xero, because then they haven't gone through your business validation process.
Okay, that makes sense. So I'm just reading. I've skipped down a little bit in the chat box here. I think this is following on from the last question. Do we need to engage with an access point ourselves?
In a perfect world, I think the vendors who provide the systems you already use will either be an access point or have partnered with an access point provider to enable e-invoicing inside their platforms. To my mind, Peppol e-invoicing is very much, as I said, a feature rather than a standalone solution. It should enhance what you're already doing rather than requiring you to do something new. So ideally, your current solution partners should be enabling e-invoicing for you. Taking ACMO as an example, they've partnered with Sorcode to enable e-invoicing in the AP solution, which is exactly how I think this stuff should work. However, if your current solution partners can't deliver this functionality, then certainly would be more than happy to help you out.
Okay. Now, another question. I think this might mean in terms of companies, but the question is, who is using this?
Okay. So Peppol only went live in Australia and New Zealand about 17 months ago. It was November 2019. So there's no denying that adoption of e-invoicing is still fairly early. However, in Australia in particular, there's a lot of drive towards adoption. So for example, there's a current mandate for government agencies to be enabled to receive e-invoices by July 2022, with some of the larger ones being mandated to do it by July this year. And this dovetails into the 5-day payment policy I was talking about before, where suppliers that e-invoice government agencies can get 5-day payment terms. All of this was kind of a big reason around why Peppol was adopted by Australia in the first place. And these policies were aimed around decreasing those payment times, especially for small businesses when it could drag out to as long as 60 or 90 days. But also to help reduce the costs associating with processing invoices. ATO had some research data that says that on average, a posted invoice can cost as much as $30 to process in terms of the time and the human cost, or as much as 27 for emailed invoices. Now you compare this to up to $9 for an e-invoice, and it's easy to see where there can be some cost savings in terms of processing costs. Remembering, of course, that all of this is pre-COVID as well, so the challenges around payment times and processing costs existed before the lockdowns and the work from home business models and all that kind of stuff. While I haven't seen any new research post-COVID, anecdotally, from the people I speak with, it seems to have worsened a little bit, with payments taking a bit longer and the process is becoming just that little bit harder. Now there is a consultation process around whether to extend the e-invoicing mandate to the wider economy. The outcome of that process hasn't been announced yet, so we don't know what form of mandate could take. However, kind of the industry scuttlebutt is that there will be some kind of wider mandate in place soon. We just don't know what form it will take. Whether it's an obligation on businesses or, it could be a capability mandate on software providers to provide the functionality. Who knows at this point? But at this stage, nothing has been officially announced, but we're expecting to hear more over the next 6 to 10 weeks. There are some agencies that are already connected, like I think New South Wales State Government, Treasury, etc. So as more and more of these agencies come online, the many companies in their supply chains are getting connected so that they can get these 5-day payments. On the supplier side of this, companies like Xero have sending solutions in market now, so every Xero customer can already send an e-invoice, whether they knew that or not. There are MYOB partners like Exobiz who have plugins in market now for MYOB customers. Adoption is being driven both by government supply chains and by the SME finance systems providing e-invoicing on their platforms. True that it is a little bit of a chicken and egg challenge to overcome, and that people don't want to send until there's heaps of receivers, and at the same time they don't want to get enabled to receive until there are heaps of senders. So just like asking what came first, the chicken or the egg, people are saying what comes first, sending or receiving. I'd argue we probably need to stop considering e-invoicing in the context of just being accounts payable or accounts receivable, and start framing it as an element of digital transformation that addresses both. As an organisation, an invoice is conceptually the same document type regardless of whether you're the sender or the receiver. Therefore, when considering the adoption of e-invoicing, you ought to be considering both how you send them and how you receive them. If you're suggesting that your trading partners, that they adapt their systems to accommodate your processes, there ought to really be some level of digital reciprocity whereby you adapt yours for them. And I mean, sure, you don't necessarily have bi-directional trade with all your vendors, and so there is kind of an element of paying it forward. However, you can't expect others to change for you without also considering how you can help them with their journey.
That's very interesting. It's almost like when people first joined email.
Well, yeah, it's very much like email in the late 80s at the moment.
Everyone had to set up accounts so that you could send stuff.
Indeed.
I don't have any other live questions that have come in, but I did think of another question to ask you.
Sure.
How many access point partners are there, and what are the differences?
Okay. Last time I checked ATO's accreditation list, which was last week, there were 23 organisations that have AUNZ accreditation. However, the access points aren't all created equally, and they aren't necessarily interchangeable. I'm tempted to almost push this one back on you and ask why ACMO decided to pick store code, but I'll try to answer it as neutrally as I can. Generally speaking, access points kind of fall into two groups. There are those that have proprietary solutions and those that have kind of a more agnostic integration approach. So for example, take somebody like ESCA, which is probably a swear word given who I'm talking to, but they have accreditation to be an access point. They would have what I describe as a proprietary solution because they only really provide that access point service to the customers who use their own stuff. So if you don't use them and you aren't planning on changing systems anytime soon, then they aren't really an option for you to get on the Peppol network. Whereas the other group is what I call the agnostic integrators, if you like. And StoreCove kind of fit into this category. Our focus is more on enabling customers regardless of the systems that they use, and it's non-proprietary. For the most part, we'll deal with anyone regardless of what they're using, provided it makes sense to do so, of course. Something I mentioned earlier, which bears repeating, is to talk to your existing solution partners first. If they already have the ability to facilitate e-invoicing, or they have a plan to provide it in the future, then it's more than likely going to be better to deal with them. However, if they can't help, then that's, I guess, where this conversation becomes a little more relevant. You can probably also group the access point vendors very roughly by solution maturity as well. Again, I acknowledge I'm making some sweeping generalizations here, and I'm pretty sure some of the others who may watch this may take offense to what I'm about to say next. But there are some access points who have been doing this for a while and have international experience, where there are other access points that are newer companies, or at least have adopted Peppol more recently. More often than not, it's the access point providers that have, European or Singaporean experience that have more mature solutions. However, I do acknowledge again that that's a generalization. It's not always the case.
Okay, yes. Oh, I guess that makes sense, since it's been out in Europe. Well, it was out in Europe first, and I think I just read today it's mandatory in India now as well. But you said solution maturity. Can you just maybe elaborate on what that means?
Okay, I mean the way in which the access point actually works. I'd like to avoid getting too technical, so stop me if this answer gets away from me. But imagine you want to send an e-invoice, and consider for a moment how the invoice data needs to get from your finance system to the access point. We know that the invoice data needs to be in the correct Peppol UBL format, and so we need to ask ourselves, how does it actually get into that state? I mean, most finance systems in this part of the world can't export the Peppol format natively. So who does the job of transforming the data into the right format? A mature access point solution will do that data transformation for you. It'll take whatever your finance system can provide and then transform it to meet the Peppol spec to make sure it works. However, a less mature solution may push that burden back onto you and require that you actually create the format first and provide it correctly in the first instance. Another consideration might be the timing of how the invoice data moves from your system to the access point. We would advocate using, a more modern RESTful API so that transactions basically happen in real time, whereas other solutions in the market may rely on, email or SFTP to move batch files around, so that invoices are processed in batches, on a schedule every couple of hours. I guess by solution maturity, I like using metaphors, so I'll try another one. Let's say you wanted to ride a bike down a hill. Would you rather ride a modern mountain bike or a penny farthing? I mean, on paper, they're both bikes. They both have wheels and they'll both get you down the mountain. But, one's far more technologically mature than the other, and it's going to get you there quicker, safer, and more efficiently. And it's kind of the same with access points. You need to kind of look past some of the bullet points because the process really does matter just as much, if not more, than the outcome.
I'm not even sure what that other bike was that you referred to. But I'll pick the mountain bike thing.
the big old-fashioned ones with the big wheel that you sit on top
of. That's great. We are coming up to the end of our time. I'm just looking through the chat to see if there's any other questions. Thank you so much for talking with us today, Kris, and answering so many questions. And thank you to everyone who has joined us today and helped spark this important discussion. Thank you for all the live and pre-submitted questions. I don't see any more in the chat box. We do look forward to bringing you some more of the experts to help answer your questions. So if you do have any topics of interest, just use our registration form to pop your details in and ask any questions or suggest any topics. So this has been a very interesting discussion for me. It's all this part of the digital transformation and all the pieces that fit into it. So thank you, Kris. We, as ACMO, look forward to working with StoreCove to help our AP customers on their Peppol journey. If anyone does have any tricky technical questions for Kris, please feel free to email them through and I will forward them on. And, you know, maybe if we get lots of questions, Kris, you can join us again.
No problem, I'll be happy to.
Okay, fantastic. Well, thank you again for your time, and we look forward to our next Ask the Experts webinar in about 2 weeks. So we'll see you then.